Good evening, very warm welcome. My name is Angelina Davidova. I'm a moderator of this webinar for tonight. And together with the Ukraine War Environmental Consequences Work Group, we're very happy to see you tonight at the webinar dedicated to green reconstruction of Ukraine. I would like to remind that this series of webinars, the Ukraine War Environmental Consequences Work Group is co-organizing together with the Reporters Without Borders Sweden and the Svea Green Foundation. And tonight we will be discussing questions of ecosystem restoration and also of green reconstruction of Ukraine, mainly the energy sector of Ukraine. And now I would like to pass on the virtual microphone to our first speaker, and that is Oleksiy Vasyliuk, who is representing Ukrainian nature saving group, and he's also an expert with our group, so Ukrainian War Environmental Consequences Work Group. So Oleksiy, very warm welcome.
Good evening. Well, I will be very grateful if you help me to show the presentation. I will be asking you to click the slides. The thing is that right now, the topic of green recovery and reconstruction has become very popular and fashionable today. You can find it in thousands of different speeches of different people, in different articles, in mass media, in different agendas. You can find these topics in various meetings and discussions. But it seems to us that, unfortunately, everything under the umbrella of green recovery is not the green recovery in the essence. This is just a catchphrase, green recovery, but very often people use it for any type of reconstruction or recovery after the war. Before we talk about the recovery, we need to understand, first of all, what had been damaged or destroyed and how, because recovery and reconstruction has to mean the reconstruction of what was damaged during the war or what was destroyed in the hostilities. Of course, we are talking about different damages to the territories as a result of explosions of ordnance. We have been writing about that, the consequences of fortification buildings after movement of military vehicles around the territories. And unfortunately, natural and climatic processes contribute to the destruction of buildings because people leave the houses and buildings, and we have rains and snow, changes of temperature between summer and winter. Therefore, this contributes to the destruction which began after the explosions and bullets and mines. So vegetation starts growing and the destruction continues. So the wild nature contributes to the destruction, while there are no people because the territory is contaminated with mines, and it's going to last for a long time. Even if the war finishes tomorrow, decades have to pass after the territory contaminated with mines, after this territory will be fully checked. I'm talking about mine contamination. I'm not talking only about the specific minefields, but I mean all the territories where explosions used to happen, because we still have some unexploded ordnance that stay in the ground or on the surface of the ground, and they have not exploded and they are still dangerous. So looking for those ordnance and their liquidation is also has to be done during the demining process. Also, we have soil contamination after explosion of ordnance. And also, there is a very big impact after the destruction of the Kakhovka hydropower plant, with the subsequent flooding of the territory and the drying of the water reservoir and other large-scale things. I would like to show you an example from the village of Andriivka, Donetsk region. Right now, it has been 3 months on the front line. I need to warn you that this video is going to be broadcast directly from YouTube, and there can be an advertisement that we will need to watch for several seconds. So I mean the video after the advertisement. So, and I will comment on the video after it finishes. So this video was recorded during the military operations on the territory of Andriivka village. This happened approximately in August of this year. As we can see, there is no green vegetation at all, though this is summer. There are no branches on trees, no vegetation, though until recently this has been a village. People used to live here, they had their gardens, so after the active hostilities, this is how the territory may look like. So we can see no signs of animals or no signs of live vegetation. I think we can stop the video, so everybody will be able to see it later on the presentation. The idea is there are certain damages that will need restoration. Not just everything deteriorated, or it's not just you don't like it or like it. There are so many negative consequences of military activities, but some of them can be repaired. For example, demining. Of course, any person can't just go and demine territories. This demining has to be done in a centralized way, so gradually the territories are going to be declared as safe. I specially selected different types of damages that will require different solutions. For example, we can see the destroyed part of the Chernobyl biospheric reserve, natural reserve. This is not about the biospheric reserve, but construction of fortifications because of the construction of fortification, a lot of soil has been and dust was put into the air that were contaminated in 1986. This contamination used to be underground, covered with leaves, but then it was lifted up, and the territory is once again inaccessible for staying there, for doing research or other types of works. Then you can see the consequences of dam destructions. So it will be necessary to rebuild the dams or move people to some other areas. These are forests after the fire that will have to be restored. Unfortunately, in the area of active hostilities, most of the forests are made up of pine, and these are artificial forests. So it would be difficult for the territory for the nature to restore itself. So people will have to do it. And also some damages on the hills, on the natural areas. They are going to lead to an active erosion if we don't do anything to help it. With every rain, with every new snowfall, more and more fertile soils are going to be going down. So this is not everything. But some efforts can be made to restore the damaged territories. I'm not talking about roads or factories, because factories and roads or even residential buildings are very difficult to put under the umbrella of green recovery. But the recovery of territories, environmental systems, landscapes, or other natural areas, let's say landscapes in general, this is going to surely fall under the green recovery concept, and we will need to restore those damages, because the forest is not going to grow by itself in the Kherson region. The erosion is not going to stop by itself, and the water is not going to subside by itself. Next slide, please. It is very important within the green recovery. It is very important to pay attention to the soils. I'm not going to go deep into this. You can look into the UWEC website and find articles about that in 3 languages. You can look for different materials, but the fact is that some of the territories of soils in Ukraine has been contaminated after the explosions of ordnance. This is true both for the north of Ukraine, which was liberated, and other liberated territories in the east, and also the southern part of Ukraine is still occupied. There are still ongoing hostilities, and the situation is difficult there. So we have different aspects. For example, we have some areas which are more contaminated and lesser contaminated areas. And again, because soil is also an ecosystem, it has a lot of small live organisms. And those organisms are building the soil, they are destroying the remnants of flora. So this soil is being created by these smaller microscopic animals with their paws and claws. So the soil cannot exist without small insects and organisms. And they can't survive on the territories where the military hostilities were happening. Probably we are going to publish a separate article on this topic. We are finishing our research, and we will publish a separate article on this in the UWEC. So restoration of soils is also a green recovery, because soil is an ecosystem, and soil is a product of the ecosystem work. In order to restore it, we need to work not on the areas where farmers want to do it or landowner. For example, if they have a land plot and they would like to return to it as soon as possible. Maybe this particular land plot is going to be too contaminated to return. So this type of work will have to be planned in a centralized way. So if we try to understand what green recovery is, we will get different answers from different people. Well, today my position is it's not neutral because I'm a biologist, but I believe that a green recovery has to be connected with the environment and not with just rebuilding the infrastructure. In the same way, mine decontamination is another process. This is not a recovery. Some people believe that mine demining is enough, but this is not enough. Demining means that we have an opportunity to start the recovery on particular areas. But sometimes people call demining green recovery as well. If we compare this, for example...
But if we speak about remediation, when a special species of plants are being planted, then of course we can admit that such technologies are existing, and this is also kind of rebuilding or recovery. Rebuilding of ecosystems is also a type of recovery. But just to leave everything as it is and to let the nature to recover itself, it's also a type of recovery, but we understand that there are many risks connected to that. And finally, if we recover the economy of Ukraine and everyone speaks about it now, then those international meetings that already took place, and in their name there was always green recovery mentioned, but nobody during those meetings mentioned the recovery of ecosystems. So several events of this type took place already, but they never mentioned green recovery on those meetings. And of course, I understand that at some level it is necessary to find a compromise between our desire to recover the nature and between other wishes and priorities. And this compromise can be done in the following way: which methods we use for the recovery. One can do various activities in a qualitative way or not in a qualitative way, with an effect on nature or with less effect. That's why when we speak about the recovery of our economics, infrastructure, settlements, etc., and we are using the modern green standards and not like in the past. Because we of course still have this post-Soviet history, and some of our standards are outdated and following the Soviet model, unfortunately, which was not the model for green standards. But if we are now changing the standards and using modern methods, green methods, we also need, for example, to think about the materials when we speak about recovery. I try to simplify the thing. For example, we want to build a new house on the place of an old destroyed house. Where will we get the materials for it? We can destroy part of natural reserve in order to get, for example, the stone from some cliff, or we can destroy some beach and take the sand from this beach. The second option would be the following. We could take care of the nature, and unlike the first option, we could opt for more green option. That's why I would recommend to be very careful when we speak about green recovery and when we use this term. I mean, all organizers of our event, you definitely heard how the word ecology is sometimes misused. Very often, some terms are called ecological, where they should not be called like this. So when we speak about recovery, we need to be careful what we mean by that. I'd like to draw your attention to this picture on the slide. It was made at the end of June this year. It was made in the south and eastern part of Ukraine. The white spot, it's a Kakhovka reservoir, how it looked like after the terror. And you see how sand looks like from the space. Near Melitopol, you also see some white spots, but these are the clouds. In the center, we see a big green line, which comes to the east and to the north. This is a front line, and this is around 1 million hectares, and it's now covered by vegetation. So previously they were just fields and settlements, and now it's just an evergreen territory. If we look at this territory, not like at the picture, but as if we make the thermal picture, we have several tools of NASA, and here we can measure the temperature of the territory and how the soil is covered, whether it has plants, vegetation or not. On such thermal pictures, you can see when the cold colors mean plants, vegetation. Summer 2021, you see on the picture, there is a field in cold colors. Usually, the open territories, they are heated very quickly, and that's why you have here warmer colors. And the former fields are, you can see on the picture, the former fields have now a lot of vegetation, and they have a cold color. But this vegetation is not a good sign for us. On the next slide, you will understand why. The plants that are very quickly growing on the abandoned territories. Usually, they are some invasive plant species. They have many seeds and they grow massively. You see the pictures from Andriivka village. You see the first picture and then the second, which was made 2 weeks after. And you see 2 weeks after, the territory became a lot greener. You can compare those two pictures. You see that the vegetation is quickly growing because the invasive plants, they are spreading so quickly. They are dying, they are growing again. While we were working on the fields and we were fighting some insects, one could not see those invasive plants. But as soon as there is no agriculture, then everything is covered by vegetation very quickly. Next slide, please. In our case, the most aggressive invasive plants on the territory of Ukraine, they were all brought from Northern America. And even if we look, okay, I will try to reformulate it. If we compare the picture of the abandoned fields and settlements with the territory around Irpin River. Irpin River, it's a place where the Russian invasion on Kiev was stopped, exactly near Irpin. The territory around Irpin River hosted several fights, but now it's a natural reserve, and I can tell you that here we have very humid ecosystem. Usually in the river valleys, as such new species don't grow very well. And that's why there is certain difference, because in the valley of the river, after any destruction, the nature will recover. And the places where there were settlements, where people lived, where the humidity was less, then the processes will look differently and the nature will not recover so quickly. So on the abandoned settlements and fields, we could find only 3 or 4 species that could recover and not more. You have approximately 5 more minutes. Next slide, please. Therefore, we understand when we analyze various situations, we need to have a very special approach and analyze everything individually. For example, now you look at the picture which was made around Kakhovka Reservoir. These green plants, these are millions of young trees. These are the poplar trees and other trees that were growing here before, in the past. Of course, out of them, only some will survive. Not all will survive. But the fact that the nature is recovering here, and it happened very quickly, within 4 months, it's a very good sign. It is happening like it should be. And if you ask us what to do here, we would answer nothing should be done. Because the nature is doing the whole job itself. We don't need to do anything. Next slide. And if we have a look, just a quick example, how big the trees can grow within 4.5 months. So 4.5 months ago, there was nothing at this place. And on this photo, you can see how big the trees grew in 4.5 months. But it's totally different. The situation will be if we look how the nature is being recovered on the territory of the field or some settlement, because normally On such territories, only invasive plants are going to recover. That's why there we should do something. We can't leave everything as it is. In any case, green recovery, whenever it comes, green recovery should be planned for each separate territory of this type. This is an illustration, 3 types of plants from Northern America, which are successfully growing on all abandoned areas. As you can see, the territory is just planted by one type of plant. Next slide, please. It's another species. Some trees like olive trees and Ravinia, which came from Northern America. They are also invading the abandoned territories. And again, we will need to plan some actions in order to liquidate this type of plant. And next slide, please. There can be various scenarios for green recovery, and we need to think over what we do about the green recovery. We need to think whether we need to recover the nature or we need to recover the economics of the country, or maybe we could combine both. And we see here that we don't have so many options. When analyzing each of these areas, the situation will be, of course, different. But we have several options. We can demine the territories and continue doing agricultural business, if the territory allows. Next, demine, and if it is not possible to plant something, maybe it is possible to do mining or get building materials there. Third option, if we demine or we can't demine the territory, and then we will just let this territory for the nature.
Also, we can create some red zones or reserve zones that cannot be used in any way because they are too contaminated. And I believe that as a result of this future green recovery, Ukraine is going to turn into a patchwork of territories with different solution on different patch or different area. And to make a conclusion, I would like the green recovery of Ukraine to be, well, I would like the green recovery to take into account how the recovery and restoration itself makes impact on the environment. Territories are one thing, but what if we rebuild settlements? So a lot of settlements have been totally destroyed. When we restore them, when we rebuild the houses, the roads, the industrial facilities, we will need a lot of building resources for that. Stone, sand, cement, wood, and all these are ecosystems. We don't have them on the warehouse. We will have to take everything from the nature. So it's very important to supervise this from the point of view of society, from the point of view of journalists, because the recovery processes are going to take more time than we shall live. The recovery shall take a lot of decades in the future, and we will need to control it. We will need to ensure that the recovery should not harm the nature, because this recovery, otherwise this recovery is not going to be green in any way. If you have any questions after the second speaker, I will be happy to answer them. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Oleksiy. I have already received several questions, but I will keep them for later, until later for discussion. I'm giving the floor to Torsten Wöllert, who is in charge of the work of the European Union in this topic, and specifically in green recovery and restoration of the energy sector. Torsten, please. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. What does this mean, this відновлення? So Ukraine, and maybe a bit about myself. I'm now connected from Brussels. I'm working for the European Commission. Usually I'm working from Kiev. I'm a member of the European Union's delegation in Kiev, working mostly on energy issues and everything related to this, including renewables, energy efficiency, climate change, things like that. So one of the interesting dimensions is that now Ukraine needs to do this відновлення in many, many respects. And we have just seen there is now a decision by the EU Council to start negotiations about Ukraine becoming a member of the European Union. And this also means відновлення. You have to renew society, you have to renew the economy, you have to renew your legal base. This is, of course, combined with the need to renew the country to overcome the damages of war. And it also means that you have to renew the country in a sense that it becomes, that the logic changes. It becomes, let's say, no longer part of the post-Soviet logic, but part of the European logic. And this is the context that I'm coming from. This is the context that we are normally discussing. And the interesting questions are, where do these two aspects, which are all in this восстановление wording, where do they match, and where can we combine them so that really the reconstruction, the восстановление of Ukraine becomes ecological, but also, let's say, European in the modern sense, so that Ukraine becomes a country with a structure, the society, the needs, the economy, the rules of the 21st century in Europe. And what we normally discuss in our, we call it Green Deal dialogue, is how can Ukraine's rebuilt economy and society become part of the wider European society and economy? What are the economic opportunities, the value chains of the future, especially the green value chains? How can this contribute to the renewal of Ukraine in all aspects, including, of course, the very foundation of life and the economy, the environment? And how does the policy that Ukraine needs to develop when it wants to become a member of the European Union help in all this process? And it's a bit different angle that we are looking at. And one specific aspect, which I think is fundamental, not only for the renewal, but for the whole society, is how do you deal with climate change? How do you deal with climate change policy? When you talk about восстановление, when you talk about the investments that will be needed, do you want to rebuild what was there before? Or do you want to build something which is more future-proofed, including when it comes to environmental sustainability, climate resilience, mitigation of climate change, etc. And this is also true for the ecosystems, because we see now that the climate is changing. There is also the precipitation is changing. So we have now less rainfall in the south of Ukraine. We have more extreme weather events, etc. So what we are not trying to establish together with the Ukrainian authorities, NGOs, media, businesses, is to try to create a consensus on what this Zelene Vidnovlenie means for Ukraine and how we can support the process. And one thing which I think is of key importance is that the sustainability criteria, which have a lot of environmental dimensions, not only, but environmental is really at the core of this. These sustainability criteria are anchored in the methodology of rebuilding the country, so that you have clear criteria where investments should go and how can they contribute to, say, sustainability. And this also includes on how the land will be used. For instance, the question of which type of agriculture does Ukraine want to pursue? Because the agriculture that Ukraine has now is largely a legacy of the Soviet Union. You had the, savkhozy, kolkhozy, all these big centralized structures. And this has been privatized to a certain degree, and it's still in a sort of hung status where you can partly own the land, not really own the land. So this is all in transition. And which kind of agriculture and which kind of agro-food production does Ukraine want to build up? And what kind of ownership should be behind these structures? Because that will also depend then on the efforts on recultivation of the land will also depend on this question: who will participate, who will invest, who will be the partners? Because there are some aspects like demining, which clearly is a centralized task. But about the recultivation of land, about invasive species, etc., there's a very strong local and regional component in this. And this is very much about what do you do with the land and who owns it and which kind of economy you want to build on that. If it is the economy of the, let's say, the post-Soviet economy, that's one solution. And but if you want to have it, let's say, as the European Union is also promoting in our cooperation with Ukraine, have also more smaller farmers, organic agriculture, more sustainable forms of agriculture, etc., then the answer may be different. And you may come with a more mixed picture and not saying, well, this oblast, this region is for this type of product, and the other we do something else. One aspect which is not so much linked to this aspect of let's say the green восстановление is question of incentives to build the economy according to sustainability criteria. And one of the main criteria that we have developed very much in the European Union is how does it influence the climate? I mean, one thing is how to can cope with climate change, which is already happening, but also how much can you mitigate climate change? And the instruments that we are using there is mostly carbon pricing, where we have now an acceptance that in most sectors of the economy, there is a price to be paid for the carbon that you emit. And in Ukraine, this is there in a very rudimentary way. Ukraine has a carbon tax, but the monitoring of the MRV, monitoring, reporting, verification mechanisms are just in their infancy, so they're not yet really fully performant. So the basis for paying this carbon tax is not entirely clear. And the tax in any way is only limited to a certain number of companies, and it is also very low. So when we talk about carbon price, Ukraine now has a carbon tax of more or less 30 hryvnia per ton, which is more or less 75 euro cents. Whereas the carbon price in the European Union with the emission trading system is more or less 75 euros per ton. So it's a factor of, let's say, 100. And if you want to avoid a carbon price shock for everyone, for the whole economy, when Ukraine joins the European Union, and this is what we are now starting to negotiate after the holidays, then you have to think about how you can avoid this carbon price shock. How can this recovery of the economy, this rebuilding of the economy, be done in a way that it's climate friendly and that Ukraine will not be subject to such a shock. And this is a policy which Ukraine has started to develop already years ago, but now there's a new urgency, because if you now rebuild the country, also what Oleksiy said, I mean, some people say, well, we just need to rebuild the infrastructure and everything will be fine. Probably not, because the context has changed dramatically. So if you rebuild this without taking the environmental considerations into account, first of all, you will have difficulties when you join the European Union, because you have a carbon price and you will have a shock. You will also limit the amount of investments that you can get, because much of the money that is going to be available internationally is bound by green criteria, by sustainability criteria. And you will incentivize essentially the old technologies, inefficient technologies, which in the end will not put you into the, let's say, value chains of the future. And we are working on these kind of things. For instance, an example is that Ukraine is now active with European partners in projects to think about the recycling of damaged buildings. Because Oleksiy mentioned, you need, stone and wood and all these things for reconstructing. But you don't have to take it all from nature. You can try to recycle it. We are also talking about circular economy. And that's a very good example when you have a lot of damage, war damage to buildings. It makes a lot of sense to think about recycling as much as possible, because it is already more or less in the region where you need it. Because if it has been destroyed, you probably want to rebuild it, at least to a certain degree, in the same region. It is also that saving natural resources that you need, and it's also creating new technologies and new job opportunities in the region where you want to have it. So these kind of aspects is what we are more or less, what we are focusing on when we talk about Zelene Vidnovlenie in Ukraine. And this is also where we are trying to support financially. You probably have followed the drama about the EU support, financial support to Ukraine, where everybody essentially except Mr. Orban agrees that Ukraine will get 50 billion euros for the next 4 years. We will see, this is geopolitics, how this plays out with Mr. Orban, but I think we will find a solution there, and this money should contribute to the sustainability of the reconstruction of Ukraine. I think I will stop here. I hope we will have good questions so that we can essentially combine the two aspects, or the two different presentations into common logic. Thank you.
Спасибо большое, Torsten.
Thank you so much, Torsten. First, a question to Oleksiy. Are they making some research or studies with the help of satellites? How are they going to make a research or study on the territories that were damaged because of the war in the east of Ukraine? We need to answer here, of course not, because the situation is changing every day. At the satellite pictures, we can see the damaged territories, but we can't plan the recovery without being present on those territories. Even that small part of territories that we managed to visit, I mean those liberated territories at the very beginning of the conflict, we may say with confidence that the fields and settlements are having more and more invasive plants, and the river valleys, vice versa, are being naturally recovered. This is just a main trend. But in order to take and make some decisions, it is necessary to have a certain plan. First of all, it's about money, it's about human resources, and therefore some detailed options for recovery. It will be possible to plant these things only after demining of the territory and after the possibility to visit this territory. If the decision is made not to do anything on some part of territory, of course, in this case, nothing should be demined. But I'd like to add, there is one complicated issue. I didn't mention it today. Let's assume, or let's imagine that in the east of Ukraine, on the territory of the destroyed settlement, some new trees are growing. But demining process will last for a long time, and our cabinet of ministers is promising that the demining process will last for 70 years. So imagine some parts of Ukraine where the deminers will come only in 70 years. So just imagine those mines lying now on the surface. In 70 years, they will be already very, very deep, those mines, under the roots of the trees. And I can't imagine how the demining process will look like at that time. Maybe we will just need to burn the whole forest. That's why I think that the time will influence the scenarios for those territories that need to have demining. So the longer the time frame, the more the chance is that we will need to leave everything as it is. At the same time, my colleague is absolutely correct. I mean, the colleague who just made a presentation. We should not always look at the past when we had so-called kolkhozes, but we need to look in the future. And what the future brings, nobody knows. Of course, there are people having some private property, but the status of the land. So imagine, people have land, but it doesn't mean if this land belongs to them, they can use this land, maybe because it's too contaminated or whatever. That's why it is difficult now to understand for us why we need to demine the territory. If we look at various scenarios, we will have some understanding. For example, here it is necessary to demine in order to use the fields for agriculture. And there we need to demine in order to rebuild the settlement. So we need to understand the reason why we are demanding every piece of land. And in such a way, we will be able to make a priority list, which territories should be demined first and which second. That's why those territories which are worth demining on the first line, those territories, it will be necessary, of course, to demine as soon as possible, but the territories that will be at the very bottom of the list, then there will be a big possibility that they will be just forgotten and abandoned at some point. So it's a very big issue for discussion, but nonetheless, it's what we can say now with 100% certainty that we will not be able to recover and rebuild everything like it was. Only some things will be recovered, some not. But anyway, the recovery will be for better. That's why I'm optimistic here about recovery. I also rely very much on the partners of Ukraine, each country that helps our country. I do understand that now we are fighting the Russian army. But as soon as the war is finished and we work and concentrate only on recovery of the country, there will be a very precise calculations made where the money should be invested and where not. And there will be a chance that some parts of the land will be recovered and they will be used by agricultural farmers.
And around Berlin, we still have places where, for instance, when there is a fire brigades cannot go because there are too many mines, too many unexploded weapons from the Second World War. So, and this is, how many years? 80 years after the end of the war, in a country which is rich, etc. So I think this is absolutely right what Oleksiy said. The society, the region has to make a choice on how to use the land and to have priorities on making sure that the land can be used for the purposes that society wants it for. And there may be places, like in some areas around Berlin, where there was an agreement that, okay, we will have this more or less as a wild place. There will be some forest, but we have to remember that it is a dangerous place. So we had a problem, for instance, last year. There were wildfires, and the fire brigades could not go there because there were too many mines. So even that is not completely wild. But I think this is what will happen. And that's why it's so important that the regions are involved and take the ownership of the process, because you cannot completely centralized manner do this.
Спасибо, Торстен, за это добавление. Мне кажется, очень действительно важный пункт и очень важно поставить...
Thank you, Torsten. You made a very important point. It is very vital to discuss it on international level. Next question to Torsten. The question is European Union going to recover Ukraine, and is it like a separate project, or is it in the context of the solving of ecological issues of the whole region, like Moldova, Poland, Belarus will be included there as well? Is this a question regarding ecology? Is this question about ecology? Yes, it's about ecological recovery, green recovery.
Okay, thank you. We have, of course, environmental activities which are essentially designed to preserve nature. We have, Emerald Network, Nature 2000, protected areas, etc. And this is a regional approach. So this is for the whole region, including, Poland, Moldova, Ukraine. I don't know. I think Belarus has now stopped all the cooperation with the European Union on this, but this is designed to be a regional program because this is a regional network of environmental protection. The main focus now, when we talk about the rebuilding, it's not reconstruction. It's really rebuilding. It's building something. Is how the economies of the countries in the region can work in a sustainable manner in the 21st century, in the conditions that have changed quite a lot since the end of the Soviet Union. And this is especially true, of course, for the countries that have decided to work very closely with the European Union and who want to become a member of the European Union, like Moldova and Ukraine. And they work also very closely in the regional context with the neighboring member states of the European Union. And there it is essentially about creating an economy which is sustainable, which is, let's say, protecting the environment, addressing the social needs, and also create value in a context which is not only national. Because imagine, for instance, in Ukraine is a big country. You can create a lot of value inside the country just for the country, so in a purely national context. But in Moldova, for instance, that's much more tricky. So you have to think about working with the neighbors because you are a small country. But the logic is more or less the same. How to develop the economy and society, including education, healthcare, social issues, everything, environmental protection rules, environmental assessment rules, public participation, etc., in a way that you don't get, let's say, investments which are essentially not sustainable, which are only based on cheap labor, cheap natural resources, but that you follow the path of, for instance, Portugal or Ireland. When they joined the European Union, they were relatively poor, and now they're much better off because they're part of the European value chains. And this is according to the European standards. This also includes, for instance, certification, so that the product that you produce is immediately sellable everywhere in Europe and beyond Europe, because the European standards are essentially recognized in many, many other parts of the world, including North America. So this is more or less the logic that we are working in. And then, of course, we have bilateral activities, programs with Ukraine, with Moldova, etc. And of course, the closer this cooperation is, and the closest now in the Eastern European part is Ukraine and Moldova, the more, let's say, resources will be made available. And of course, the hope is that the logic that worked 20 years ago for countries who then joined the European Union, that investments, sustainable investments were happening because the countries were in the process of joining the European Union. I mean, if you take, for instance, Slovakia, etc., that this logic will also apply, and we will see stable, sustainable investments, which of course should happen according to the European Union environmental rules, which should prevent that the environment is just further damaged and used essentially as a cheap resource for, let's say, quick gains of some.
Спасибо, Torsten. Так,
Thank you, Torsten. Next question to Oleksiy. Oleksiy, is it natural that in 4 months the trees on the bottom of Kakhovka Reserve have grown up to 2 meters, or because there is some soil or from the agricultural lands or fertilizers coming from other lands? No, this is not connected with the nitrates or any other fertilizers. The thing is that for us, it was a surprise. We knew that the nature was going to recover, but we didn't expect it so fast. And we were a bit lucky because this terroristic act happened in the beginning of June, because this is the time when poplars and other trees are having their seeds. If it happened in another point of time, the situation would be different. So while the water was subsiding, the seeds were put inside on the surface of the water reserve. So the seeds entered the wet ground. But why did they grow so fast? It was so interesting for us that we started a research. We have made 3 expeditions in this year to research, and we are researching several land plots. So we are witnessing a natural phenomenon that we didn't see before. Because if we didn't have any other water reserves on the river of Dnipro and on other rivers, every year these territories would be flooded in the spring. And after the flooding of rivers, their waterbed would change, their riverbeds would change their ways. We would have new islands coming up and down, and the nature would have time to restore on all these different parts. But right now we don't have this phenomena because everything is very strongly regulated. But now we have this situation, we are witnessing this phenomena, and we understand that processes are there. The nature is ready. People were not ready for this terroristic act, but the nature is always ready to return to those territories when the water goes away. The nature needed only 4 months to cover these territories. Of course, this is a temporary situation. There are millions and millions of trees. In order to become a full-fledged forest, only one tree out of 100 are going to survive. So now these trees are going to compete to decide which tree is going to stay and grow and have a long life, unlike hundreds of other trees. And we don't know who is going to win this battle. We shall see next year. But right now, as we imagine, there are up to 60 young trees on 1 square meter, and this is a very big number. And we understand, and we can say for sure that now we know that the nature has mechanisms to solve this problem. We just didn't have other opportunities before to see these processes. Thanks to all this, as dreadful consequences can be after the catastrophe, because we had certain consequences not on the area of the water reserve, but there were consequences on the flooded areas as well. And we believe that some live species probably they have disappeared. In some. So after this terroristic act, probably some of the species have disappeared from our Earth. This catastrophe is very big, and we are the first people who live now who can witness how the nature can return to such big territories if the nature has opportunities to do this. And there is some share of romanticism for this. There are no other places on our Earth that we can visit for the first time. But now we can witness some natural phenomena that other people didn't witness before. Thank you, Oleksiy. Next question to Torsten. Ukraine plans to actively develop atomic energy to restore the Kakhovka hydropower plant. Will the European Union have programs to incentivize development of renewable sources of energy? And what role does renewable energy has to have in the energy mix of the country? So ideally, what would be the role of solar, wind energy and other renewable energy? Thanks a lot for the question. This is a very global and disputable question.
You know, in the European Union, what we call the energy mix, so the sources of essentially power and heat production are very different. So when you have, for instance, France, there's a lot of nuclear. You have countries like Austria or Sweden, where you have a lot of renewables. Sweden, for instance, has both nuclear and renewables. And what we have now is agreed essentially. I think in Ukraine there's a consensus that the new energy system will be more resilient, which means it has to be more decentralized. The Soviet infrastructure is very vulnerable, and we see it now. The big damage that air attacks can do when you have a so centralized infrastructure. So there is an agreement that it needs to be more decentralized. There's also an agreement that coal should be phased out. Essentially, when you talk about heat and electricity production, oil in Ukraine plays no real role. So gas is seen as a transition fuel. And the main question is how much nuclear, how much renewables you will have in your future energy system, and how will you balance the system. And this is where gas can play a positive role, at least for the coming years. We have seen different types of announcement, and we have also seen different types of developments. So over the last couple of years, Ukraine has added a lot of renewable energy capacity, notably solar and wind, which has now already contributed to energy security during the war, because it is decentralized and it is very difficult, essentially, to destroy. The investments came because there were very generous feed-in tariffs, which turned out to be so high that it's not that they're creating financial problems. So it is clear this is not a model that is sustainable from a financial point of view, because in the end, this will have to be paid by somebody. And the Ukrainian energy consumer has clear limits of what can be paid. We are now seeing on the renewable side, we are seeing a lot of interest in finding new models of financing it. There is a process that is called the National Energy and Climate Plan, which is a European-wide process. Each European Union member state is doing this. Ukraine is also doing this. There's a discussion, including with international partners, even from the United States, how the energy mix, how the energy consumption patterns should look by 2030, because that's the time frame for the National Energy and Climate Plan. So if anyone is interested in this, I would really invite you to participate, because this is the fundamental platform where these kind of questions are discussed. There's also a civil society component for that, so the people are very open to include, experts and opinions in this. There is a search for new financing models for renewables. And on the nuclear side, we see that de facto there has been no investments for the last 30, even more years. The only investments that were taken were financed by international partners of Ukraine. There are now a lot of announcements of increasing the capacity of nuclear power plants, building new nuclear power plants. The latest announcement was, I think, from this week or last week, that Ukraine will build an American nuclear reactor in Khmelnytsky, which should cost more or less $5 billion. And also there is a question, how could this be financed? So in the end, it is a question about long-term costs and balancing the system. And as always, in all countries, this is a difficult discussion, and we see different outcomes of this discussion in different countries of the European Union. For us, it is important that the energy system of Ukraine will be fully compatible with the European Union one, so that we can really have practical market integration. And we see the first steps of this. When you look now in winter, Ukraine can import electricity from the European Union, can export to the European Union. The transmission system operator, Ukrenergo, is now a full-fledged member of the association of these operators of the European Union, NSOE. So there's a process which is going on. In the end, there are two dimensions. One is what I mentioned is the National Energy and Climate Plan, which should outline the vision, the plans, the targets for 2030. And then it will be the capability to invest. And for that, you need good investment models. And now, of course, this is very difficult because during the war, the prices for electricity are kept stable for obvious reasons. But these prices do not allow for new investments. So that will be a very difficult discussion and important discussion for after the end of the war. How these investments will happen, how they can be promoted, and which kind of investments will be given priority. And we see that for renewable energy, I think now, if I'm not mistaken, I think globally, renewable energy has found much more investment than any other source of power generation globally. And I don't see any reason why this should be fundamentally different in Ukraine. But this is, a discussion which is difficult to have now because it depends on prices, on security of investment, because it is clear if you want to rebuild your energy system with modern technology, you need a lot of investment and you need a lot of investors, and most likely some of them will come from outside Ukraine.
Спасибо, Торsten. Так, еще один вопрос.
Thank you, Torsten. Another question to Oleksiy. Oleksiy, just a second. Do you have a plan to fight invasive species in Ukraine? No. The answer is easy. No. Right now, our efforts are aimed to approve the official list of invasive species that we have to fight with in Ukraine. Unfortunately, well, there are some things that we can be proud of, but in this area we have nothing. Even this year, we have approved the list. It was a big achievement because we were pursuing it since 2007. So the Environmental Ministry has approved the list of invasive species this year, but then our forestry agencies asked other agencies, and they made the ministry to cancel this list. And this was the biggest defeat for us in this year. So we thought that this was the biggest achievement after 2007. But so far, we have lost this round. Our forestries are against this list. There are 3 types of trees that they like to plant in the steppe zone are included in the list. This pseudo-acacia or white acacia. This is also the red oak and also the olive tree. So these trees can survive in the conditions of dry climate, but unfortunately they have big negative consequences for the biodiversity. That is why the government has made a decision so far in favor of forestries, because they like to get their salaries to plant the trees, the forests, but this forest is not used for the economy. We don't fell the trees in the steppe zone for economic reasons, but those forestry staff needs to get salary. We don't need to use it, we need to plant it, but we will plant it every year to get our salary. So the situation is bad with the invasive species.
But we know that our Ministry on Environmental Protection didn't change its mind. They created a special working group, and they're going again to approve this list. So they found some legal ground to abandon, to forget about this list, but no, there will be a working group who will continue working on that issue. There are, of course, various interests. Some people are more interested in protecting their private economical interests, and some are interested in bringing Ukraine closer to European Union. I do hope that in the nearest future this list will be approved finally. Why it is so important? Because in our legislation now we have such a regulation that one can't plant invasive plants in the forests. But it's all about biological terms. I am a biologist, and I can tell you which species is invasive and which not. But people who are not biologists and who are not interested, in my opinion, they may ask, where is it written in legislation? That's why we developed the list of those invasive plants that are not allowed to be planted in the forests. If to be optimistic, same as our ministry is, then within next 3-4 months this list will be approved. We do hope it will be approved before the spring comes and new plants will be planted. Otherwise, those invasive plants will just spread on their own, and there will be even a bigger negative impact of them on the territories. Therefore, At the current moment, we don't have this list, unfortunately. Thank you so much, Alexei. One more question to Torsten. In the recent research that was prepared by ECODIA, Ukrainian environmental organization, it is said that around more than 50% of CO2 emissions because of the war in Ukraine, they usually are coming because of the recovery of the country. Is there any plan how to decrease this amount of the emissions besides those plans that we have on the rebuilding of the houses that were destroyed?
Very good question. To my knowledge, but I'm more on the energy side. To my knowledge, there are no specific projects in this direction, but what we are now trying to establish is are the criteria for the green reconstruction, the Zelene Vidnovlenie. What does it mean? Which projects should be financed? Which kind of investments should be given priority? And if you want to use the most effective technologies, you have to give some incentives for that. And for instance, I talked already about the carbon price. This is a general mechanism, but of course, the more you invest, the more important it becomes. And essentially, the reconstruction of buildings, of the industry, of infrastructure is essentially a huge investment program. So the question is, for what will the money be used? And how can you make sure that the most effective technology, the most climate-friendly technology will be employed? So we are now working with the Ministry of Environment, also with the Energy Efficiency Agency, on concepts to agree on the development of the carbon price in Ukraine, so that everybody who invests can more or less understand what to expect over the next years. What is the carbon price in Ukraine? The second question in this regard is, when you want to work with international partners, it's not only the national carbon price which is important, but it's also the international practice. And when you work, for instance, with the EBRD, EIB, World Bank, etc., they have what they call a shadow carbon price. So when they assess whether a project is sustainable, they will not use the carbon price that Ukraine has now. They will assume another carbon price, the so-called shadow carbon price. This is designed to make sure that the projects that are funded by them will be sustainable. And the third dimension is, and this is where we talk now with the Energy Efficiency Agency, there's a law which establishes a decarbonization fund. And essentially, the payments of the carbon price in Ukraine will go to this decarbonization fund. And this is a practice which is very common in the European Union. We have part of the revenues from the emission trading system are recycled for decarbonization. And there are specific programs to help the emitters of CO2 to reduce their emissions by getting money from this decarbonization fund. This is something where we would like to work next year on setting up this decarbonization fund in a way that is fully transparent, that also international partners can contribute, and which is also clear for the companies who have to pay the carbon price, so that they can understand that they will have support for the decarbonization. But this is not specific to the reconstruction, to the Vidnovlenie. I'm not aware that we have something specific for the Vidnovlenie, except very targeted things, like, for instance, the recycling of building materials. And but something which is also very important, because it's not only the carbon, the CO2 emissions in the process of reconstruction, but also the CO2 emissions when you use the new infrastructure. And that's all about the energy efficiency of the new buildings, of the new factories, of the new infrastructure. And there we are working with the Reconstruction Agency, with the Ministry of Infrastructure on establishing standards so that energy efficient buildings will be given preference, that technologies which are CO2 friendly will be given preference, etc. And the idea is, and the hope is, that we can integrate this into the evaluation for investment projects. And you may have heard there's now the development of having a platform for the reconstruction, what they call the DREAM platform, where also sustainability criteria should be embedded. So if you have a project for reconstruction, the evaluation will be done including with sustainability criteria. So we are not yet there. This is work in progress, but this is also, and what is really positive is that this whole platform is supported by experts from civil society, including, for instance, Transparency International, etc. So if you have any specific expertise, interest in this domain, I think they would be more than happy to see with you how this can be integrated into the reconstruction platform of Ukraine. And if this works, this is probably the best means to make sure that the reconstruction will take these sustainability questions into account.
Спасибо большое, Торстен.
Thank you so much, Torsten. So, dear friends, on the one hand, there are no more questions left. On the other hand, our time is over. 1.5 hours is finished. I'd like to say thank you to our wonderful speakers, Torsten and Oleksiy. Thank you so much for your participation, for your expertise, for your passion to the topic, for the work you are doing in Ukraine, in Europe, for your work and ideas. Thank you for spending 1.5 hours with us. It was really a very fruitful discussion. We had many questions. You managed to answer all questions. I think our discussion was very useful. It was very comprehensive. Many points that Oleksiy and Torsten mentioned, they were really informative, and I think we had a very good, fruitful discussion. Thank you so much.
I mean, we discussed the use of land. And we discussed that this is very critical for the reconstruction, for the green reconstruction. And what we see is there's a lot of interest in this question. There's also a lot of, let's say, support in Kiev and also in Brussels, etc. But I'm deeply convinced that you need the regional involvement in this, otherwise it will not work. Because you cannot judge from Brussels or Kiev whether this piece of land should have priority, whether this piece of land is usable for, let's say, organic agriculture or not. And I think this is a challenge. It's a huge opportunity, but it's also a big challenge. How to make sure that the local ownership is ensured and that the local knowledge is included in this decision making. So if you have good ideas on how to do this, the delegation of the European Union in Kiev is very much interested.
Спасибо за такое очень конкретное предложение. Мне кажется, действительно...
Thank you so much for this very specific suggestion. I do think that many experts and colleagues and just friends of our project will respond to that. Thank you so much, Torsten. I'd like to say thank you to all our participants, to those who listen to us in YouTube and other platforms. Thank you to our technical assistants, to interpreters, and thanks to my colleagues from the UWEC group, those who helped to create this webinar. See you next time. Final webinar in the framework of this series will take place in January. We will inform you about the exact date. It will be somewhere in the middle of January. And so, see you soon. I wish you all peace. I wish that the war is over and everything is politically stable. I also congratulate you on all the holidays. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. And again, peace, security, care, solidarity to all of you. Thank you so much and see you again soon. I wish all happy news to everyone.